Hal had just come in from checking the fence line when he heard the knock, a small, almost apologetic sound against the wooden door. He'd lived alone on that ranch for 5 years without a single visitor, and for a moment he thought he'd imagined it. But then it came again. 2 soft knocks, then silence. When he opened the door, the first thing he saw was a pair of big brown eyes. She couldn't have been more than 7, barefoot and shivering in a sun-faded dress, a little bundle clutched in her arms. Her hair was tangled and her knees were scraped, and her voice was hoarse when she said it. "My mama died today. Can I stay here just one night?" Hal's hand froze on the doorknob. It was like looking at a ghost, those eyes, that voice. His mouth opened, but no words came. He'd buried his own daughter 5 winters ago, and something in this child's face opened a part of him he'd nailed shut. She didn't cry. She just stood there, polite and trembling, like she'd already rehearsed being turned away. "Barnes got blankets," he muttered finally, stepping back and letting her pass. She walked in with a kind of quiet purpose, placing the bundle, an old doll, as it turned out, on the wooden bench by the fire. She didn't ask for food or water. She sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes darting like a deer's. Hal stood behind his chair, unsure whether to sit or flee. "You got a name?" he asked after a long silence. "Marnie," she whispered. "Mama said, if anything happened, I should find a man with kind eyes and no ring on his finger." She pointed to his hand. Hal didn't know whether to laugh or break. "You been walking long?" he asked. She nodded. "All day? From the place where the smoke is?" Hal swallowed. He'd seen the column of smoke that morning, rising in the distance, but didn't go check. He'd learned to keep to himself. Now he wished he hadn't. Marnie curled up in front of the fire and closed her eyes like she'd always belonged there. Hal watched her chest rise and fall, a weight settling in his own that he hadn't felt in years. He didn't know why he said it, but he did. "You can stay the night. You can stay." She was already asleep. He was the one who stayed awake. Hal didn't sleep that night. He sat in his old rocking chair, boots still on, staring at the little girl curled near the fire. Her cheeks were smudged with dirt, but she looked peaceful, like she'd made a deal with the night and come out the winner. At dawn, when the sky barely began to shift from black to gray, Marnie stirred. She blinked up at him without surprise, like she'd expected he'd be there. Without saying a word, she pulled a worn book from the inside of her doll's blanket and placed it on her lap. "Mama's," she said. Hal leaned forward. The leather cover was cracked and faded, the stitching barely holding the pages together. She opened it gently, like it might fall apart under her fingers. "She wrote every night," Marnie said, eyes still on the page. "Said words keep the soul from rotting." Hal didn't move. He couldn't. Her voice was so soft, so practiced, it was clear this ritual had once belonged to 2 people, now reduced to 1. "This one's from last week," she added, then began to read aloud. "Marnie smiled today when I sang the song Daddy used to hum. She pretended not to, but I saw it." Her lip quivered slightly, but she kept going. "Tomorrow I'll trade eggs for milk. I think Marnie misses sugar. If anything happens to me, I hope she finds someone with kind eyes. Not perfect, just kind." She paused, looked up. Hal looked away. "That you?" she asked. "Don't know," he muttered. "I used to be." Marnie nodded, as if that answer was enough. She flipped to another page, one with petals pressed between the entries. "This one's about when we left the last town. She said people didn't like women who asked too many questions." Hal's chest tightened. He'd known women like that. Bright, curious and quickly broken by hard men and cruel towns. "What happened to her?" he finally asked. Marnie didn't answer right away. "She coughed a lot, then couldn't breathe. I waited, I sang her the song, but she didn't wake up." She looked straight at him, and for the first time he saw the weight in her gaze, older than any child should carry. "So I walked." Hal cleared his throat and stood up. "You read good," he said, too gruffly. She smiled. "She taught me. I read to her at night. But now I read to remember." Hal didn't reply. Instead, he poured her a cup of water and handed it over like it was something sacred. It was the first offering of many he didn't yet know he would make. The next morning, Marnie followed Hal outside without asking permission, her bare feet pressing careful prints into the dust. Hal had saddled up to check the western boundary, assuming she'd stay behind. But there she was. Small, stubborn, silent. She walked a few paces behind him, holding her doll like a compass. "Ain't safe out there," he said, without looking back. "You don't have boots?" She shrugged. "Mama said I've got wolf feet. Hard to bruise." Hal almost smiled. Almost. He didn't have it in him just yet. When they reached the fence line, he crouched to check a broken post. Marnie sat cross-legged in the shade of a mesquite and began to hum. Soft, off-key, familiar. Hal froze. It was a tune he hadn't heard in years. His wife used to hum it, back when she braided flowers into their daughter's hair and danced barefoot on the porch like the war hadn't touched them. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked, sharper than he meant. Marnie stopped humming. "Mama," said her papa learned it from a man on horseback who spoke 3 languages and cried when he sang. Hal stared at her. It wasn't just the tune. It was the way she hummed it, slow and reverent, like the land itself taught her the notes. "That song's older than me," he muttered. "Older than this fence." Marnie tilted her head. "But not older than the wind." She said it like it was scripture, and Hal didn't know how to argue with that. They finished the fence in silence, except for her quiet melodies floating in and out of the morning air. By the time they rode back to the ranch, Hal's shoulders felt looser, less armored. Marnie didn't ask for anything. Not food, not praise, not why he kept looking away when she sang. She just existed beside him like she'd always been there. That afternoon, she found a basket of carrots and fed them to his old mule, whispering things Hal couldn't hear. She set up 2 pine cones on the porch and named them Mr. and Mrs. Candlewick. When Hal sat down with his coffee, she passed him the journal again, opened to a fresh page. "You can write too if you want," she said. "Mama said even quiet men need somewhere to bleed." Hal blinked. The page was blank. Waiting. He didn't write anything. Not yet. But he held the book in his lap until the sun went down, fingers resting on the edge like it might burn or save him. Hal hadn't planned to go back toward the place where the smoke had been, but something about Marnie's voice that first night, how she said it, how she looked when she said it, made it impossible to forget. The next morning he hitched the mule cart and told her they were going to town for salt. It was a lie, and she must have known it because she didn't ask any questions. They rode in silence for a while until the landscape shifted. Fewer trees, more dry scrub, and then the blackened scar on the land came into view. A circle of char, still faintly fragrant with ash and soot, marked where a cabin had once stood. Hal stopped the cart. Marnie slid down without speaking, her doll clenched against her chest. She walked to a small patch of earth that looked freshly disturbed. No cross, no marker, just a small mound with a rock set near the head. "She's here," Marnie said, almost like a greeting. Hal took his hat off. He stood behind her, not sure if he should approach or keep his distance. "You buried her?" he asked. Marnie nodded. With my hands. Took all day. But she always said, "Don't leave the dead to the birds." Hal's throat tightened. He crouched slowly beside the mound, fingertips brushing the dry soil. There was a folded cloth pressed under the rock. A piece of her mother's dress, probably. Burnt at the edge, but still soft in the middle. "She built this place herself?" he asked. "With help," Marnie said. "A man used to visit sometimes, brought nails and flour, but when I asked if he was my father, she told me not to ask again." Hal glanced at her, but she didn't meet his eyes. Then one night, he stopped coming, and a month later, the fire. Hal looked at the ruins. There was no mistaking it. This had been arson. "She sick before that?" he asked. "She was coughing," Marnie said, "but it was the smoke that took her." Hal wanted to say he was sorry, but that felt small and useless. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a silver spoon, tarnished but solid, the last piece of his wife's set. "We bury things with those we love," he murmured, placing it beside the rock. Marnie stared at it. "That was yours." "Was hers," he corrected. "Now it's your mama's." Marnie didn't say, "Thank you." She just sat beside the grave and hummed her mother's tune. And this time, Hal hummed with her. That night, a storm threatened the horizon, low thunder growling just beyond the hills. But Hal wasn't worried. The roof held, and for once, he wasn't alone beneath it. Marnie had fallen asleep early, curled up near the hearth with her doll, and Hal sat by the window, watching the wind play in the tall grass. He couldn't stop thinking about that grave, or the burned beams scattered like broken ribs across the earth. He'd seen ugliness in men before, but this was the kind that left a girl digging a grave with her bare hands. When the first drops of rain started, he slipped out to the barn. The animal stirred but stayed calm. The mule blinked at him, and the hens barely clucked. Hal didn't come out to check anything. He came because his hands wouldn't stop shaking. He sat on an overturned crate in the straw and let the smell of hay and dust calm him. He hadn't prayed in years, not since his wife and child were lowered into the same ground on the same day. But now the words came unasked, like roots pushing through dry earth. "If she's meant to stay," he muttered aloud, "then help me not mess it up." It was all he could say. His throat closed after that. Then he heard the soft creak of the barn door. Marnie stood there, hair mussed, bare feet muddy. She held the journal like it was a candle. "You okay?" she asked. Hal rubbed his eyes. Couldn't sleep. She walked over, sat beside him without invitation, and opened the journal to a blank page. "Then write." He shook his head. "Ain't got much to say. Mama said even one sentence counts." She held out the stub of a pencil she carried in her pocket. Hal hesitated. Then, slowly, he took it. The page trembled under his hand. He didn't know why he wrote what he did. But when he finished, Marnie leaned over to see. 1 line, 4 words. "She shouldn't be alone." Marnie didn't smile. She didn't clap. She just nodded solemnly, folded the journal closed, and placed it back in her lap like it now held something holy. Then she leaned her head against his arm and whispered, "Mama would have liked you." Hal didn't move, didn't speak. But in that moment, with the thunder rolling and the rain beginning to drum on the barn roof, something shifted in him. Not healed, not fixed, just shifted, like a locked door cracking open, letting in the smallest sliver of light. The next morning, Hal didn't rise before the sun like usual. It was Marnie's humming that woke him, soft and steady, floating in from the kitchen like a memory wearing new clothes. When he entered the room, she stood barefoot by the stove, spoon in one hand, brow furrowed as she stirred the pot. "Tried not to burn it," she said. Mama always added sage to thicken the taste, but I only found pepper. Hal blinked, stunned to see a plate set for two on the table. The tin cups were mismatched, and the cornbread looked rough around the edges, but there was intention in everything. The folded cloth napkins, the center rock she'd placed like it was a flower vase. "You cooked?" he asked. She nodded proudly. "I listened. Watched you yesterday. And you talk in your sleep, you know." "I do not." "You do," she grinned. "Said something about fixing the south gate, then said dang chickens." Hal chuckled despite himself. He sat down slowly, watching her bring over 2 bowls. The stew was thin but hot. She sat across from him, hands folded, waiting. "Mama always prayed before meals," she said. "Do you?" Hal shook his head. "Not in a long time." "That's okay," she whispered. "I'll do it." And then she bowed her head, closed her eyes, and whispered the same melody she hummed in the barn. No words, just sound, as if she was feeding the silence. When she opened her eyes again, she looked older than 7, like the world had etched wisdom into her too early. "You don't have to keep me," she said between bites. "Mama said not everyone will, but I'm a good helper. I clean. I don't eat much. And I can sing all the old songs." Hal swallowed hard. The food stuck in his throat. "You ain't a burden," he said. "A person's not something you keep like a tool or a mule." Marnie stared at him. "Then what am I?" He looked her straight in the eye. "You're someone who needs a home, and this house hasn't been one in a long time." She didn't say anything, just nodded once, solemn, as if sealing a deal. Later that day, she took chalk and wrote her name under the window frame beside his daughter's. 2 scrawled names side by side. Hal didn't stop her. He only traced his finger beneath them both and whispered, "Welcome home." That night, she sang by the fire. 3 days after Marnie first knocked on his door, Hal spotted movement on the ridge behind the barn. It wasn't the usual fox or antelope. This shape was broader, slower, and watching. He squinted against the afternoon sun and reached for his rifle out of habit. But when the figure stepped forward, arms raised in the air, Hal paused. It was a man, worn hat, patchy beard, limping slightly as he walked, and carrying something wrapped in canvas. Marnie peeked from behind the porch post, eyes narrowing. "That's him," she whispered. "The man who used to visit Mama." Hal stiffened. "You sure?" She nodded, clutching her doll tighter. "He gave me a coin once and told me not to talk when he came by. Mama never smiled when he was around." Hal stepped off the porch and met the man halfway. "You lost?" he asked, voice flat. The man didn't flinch. "Looking for someone. Girl named Marnie. Her mother passed." "How do you know that?" Hal asked. The man lifted the canvas bundle slightly. "Went back after the fire. Cabin was gone. Figured the kid made it out." "You knew her mama?" Hal asked. "Not in the way you're thinking?" The man's jaw clenched. "I tried to help them, when I could. She didn't have friends." Hal didn't move. "You related?" The man shook his head. "Number but I owed her, from long ago." His voice faltered. "I never told her, but I knew what was coming. I saw the men ride off the day it happened. I should have gone back sooner." Hal's fingers flexed around the rifle. "You looking to take her?" The man blinked. "What? Number I came to make sure she was alive, brought her some of her mama's things, was saving them." He set the bundle down gently and backed away. "If she's safe here, that's all I needed to know." Hal stared at him. "Why come alone?" The man's face twisted. "Because when you carry shame that heavy, you can't bring company." Then he turned and walked off, slow and steady, like he'd already said goodbye. Marnie watched him from the porch. "He never hurt us," she said softly. "But he never helped either." Hal opened the bundle. Inside were 3 things: a photograph of her mother holding Marnie as a baby, a hand-stitched quilt, and a rusted tin box filled with pressed flowers and folded letters. Marnie knelt beside it and traced her mother's face. "She kept me," she whispered, "even when it was hard." Hal rested a hand on her shoulder. "And now it's my turn." The town of Red Hollow hadn't seen Hal Brenner in over 4 years, not since he buried his wife and daughter without saying a word to anyone. So when he walked into the church on Sunday morning with a small girl at his side and a handmade quilt folded over his arm, every head turned. Marnie held his hand tightly, eyes wide as they passed the pews. "She used to hum in here," she whispered. "Mama, she'd sit in the very back and mouth the words like she was afraid to be heard." Hal nodded. "We won't sit in the back." He led her straight to the front pew. The preacher paused mid-hymn when he saw them, but quickly resumed with a stronger voice, as if afraid to question it. After the service, a few townswomen whispered as Hal stood holding the quilt. Marnie watched them carefully, her jaw set. She looked like her mother when she was ready to fight silence with presence. Hal cleared his throat and turned toward the altar. "I have something to return," he said, not loud, but firm enough to cut through the whispers. "This quilt belonged to her mama, woman named Eleonora, though most of you never asked her name." Murmurs moved through the crowd. One older woman in the second row flushed red and looked away. Hal continued. "She came here more than once, sat back there hoping someone might see her. No one did, but she left behind a child. And that child is mine now. Not by blood, but by choice." Marnie stood straighter beside him. "She knew the songs better than I ever will," Hal added, "and she read the Bible out loud when her mama couldn't hold the book." The preacher stepped forward slowly. "We're sorry, Hal," he said quietly. "We failed her." Hal nodded once. "Don't fail this one." Then he turned and handed Marnie the quilt. She held it against her chest like armor. A young boy near the aisle reached out and touched the corner. "You can sit by me next Sunday," he said. Marnie blinked, surprised. "Okay," she whispered. And just like that, the room began to shift. A woman brought over a loaf of bread. Another offered shoes that might fit. Hal said little, but his hand rested on Marnie's shoulder the whole time, steady and proud. And when they stepped outside into the morning sun, he realized the church bell didn't sound quite so hollow anymore. That night, after Marnie had gone to bed with her quilt tucked around her and the doll curled beneath her arm, Hal sat alone by the fire with the journal open on his lap. He'd flipped through it a dozen times since she arrived, reading bits here and there, never daring to reach the last page. But now, with the house finally quiet, and the wind no longer howling through the shutters, he turned to it. The final entry, written in the same soft hand but darker, like her mama had pressed harder to get it all out. The ink bled a little near the edges, as if she'd cried while writing. He read slowly. "I don't think I have much time. The cough's down deep now. I tried to hold on longer. For her. But if I don't wake up, and Marnie makes it out, please, whoever finds her, let her keep her songs. She doesn't need much, just space to sing and someone who won't make her feel like a ghost." Hal stared at the page. A ghost. That word hit deep. That's what he'd been. Wandering, speaking to no one, letting days blur into each other, keeping company with silence. The entry continued. "If it's a man, I pray he remembers how to speak. If it's a woman, I pray she knows how to listen. But if it's no one, and Marnie reads this alone, then baby, Just keep humming. Someone will hear." Hal closed the book slowly, cradling it like a heartbeat. His hand trembled as he set it down, not because of grief. He'd known that storm too long to shake from it, but because he finally understood the weight of what he'd been given. Marnie wasn't just a girl in need. She was a final prayer, a living page. He stepped quietly into her room and stood in the doorway. She was asleep, one arm flung over her doll, the other pressed to the quilt. Her mouth moved slightly. She was humming even in her dreams. He knelt beside her bed and whispered, "I heard you." She didn't stir, but her hum slowed, softened, then settled into silence. Back in the main room, he picked up the journal once more and added one more line beneath Eleonora's final words. "She sings louder now, and I do too." Then he closed the book and left it open on the table, for whatever came next to see. It was a week later when Hal rode into town alone and returned with something folded in his coat pocket. Marnie met him on the porch, chalk dust on her hands, her cheeks pink from racing the mule through the pasture. "Did they have the good nails?" she asked. Hal didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out the envelope, and held it out. She tilted her head. "Is it money?" "Nope," he said. "It's harder to get than money." She opened it slowly, frowning at the paper inside. It had her name on it, first and middle, written in block letters with ink that bled slightly through the parchment. Below that, a line read, "Guardianship granted to Hal E. Brenner." Marnie stared at it. "What does this mean?" Hal crouched to her level. "It means you're mine now. Not just because you knocked on my door, not just for one night, but as long as you want to stay." She blinked, and for the first time since arriving, her face twisted. Not in fear or sadness, but disbelief. "You mean like, forever?" He nodded. "As long as the barn roof holds and the mule don't quit, yeah. Forever." Her lip trembled. "I thought forever died with her." Hal's chest tightened. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "It didn't. It just got lost for a while." She looked down at the paper again, then up at the chalk drawing on the porch. 2 stick figures side by side. One with a big hat, one holding a doll. She ran inside, rummaged through her bag, and came back with the journal. "Then this should go in the box," she said. Hal followed her to the table where she had arranged the pressed flowers, her mother's photo and now the guardianship paper, folded carefully under the quilt square. "It's our house now," she said. "Not just yours." Hal nodded slowly. "Ours." That night, they sat on the porch under a sky dripping with stars. Marnie sang one of her mama's songs, but this time she changed a few words, adding Hal's name and rhyming it with pal. It was a terrible rhyme. He laughed anyway. When they finally went inside, Hal left the porch light on, for the first time in years. Not for anyone coming, but as a marker, a lighthouse for the past, and a promise to the future. Because someone had knocked once, and this time, he had opened the door wide. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If she'd knocked on your door with eyes like that, what would you have done? Tell us in the comments.